Hey creatives, today I have a simple but effective technique for adding an interesting embossing powder texture to your art journaling, mixed media, painting, or even for your card making projects. I'm back in my junk journal for this project, and thanks to everyone who said they would like to see the rest of the art that's in this journal. In the end, I decided to keep this video as a tutorial, but I'm going to do a dedicated art journal tour video. So watch this space and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so that you don't miss it. Now this double page already has some colour and texture from me cleaning my tools when I was doing other projects. So I've used some gesso to knock back that colour and just tone it down a little bit, but still I'll be able to see those details just peeking through when I'm finished. And I've also used that pressed page technique, you know, the one I talked about in my 12 tips to start an art journal page video, and it just adds a really interesting texture. Once the gesso is dry, I'm just going to add some more texture using torn pieces of paper, and these are just pages from my junk journal that I've torn into strips. And for this project I'm going to use my matte medium to stick them to the page. Now if you're one of my regular viewers, then you'll know that I use a lot of regular gel, the gloss variety. I tend to use that as a glue, and I've talked about it before, but there are just some projects where you don't want that glossy finish, and this is one of those projects today, so that's why I'm using matte medium today, just in case you were wondering. Right, so design wise I'm going for alternate corners to add a little bit of harmony, but this isn't one of my planned pages, this is an organic page, so I was just making it up as I went along. And I had no idea of how I wanted it to look, I just wanted to use embossing powder, so you'll see it grow as it goes. So once I finished putting those strips onto the page, I just let the whole thing dry completely, because now it's time to play with some embossing powder. Now I don't know how sticky this page is, so I'm just covering it with some anti-static powder for good measure, and we'll see how it goes. Because I'm going to use a stencil and I want to get a nice clear image of the stencil. Sometimes when you're doing mixed media projects, it doesn't really matter if the embossing powder just sticks everywhere. Sometimes that's the look you're going for, but this time I specifically want to see this stencil. And I'm using this pretty cool Hexagon stencil, which was part of the Apple Blossom Issue 2 magazine kit. And if you want to get your hands on it, it is over at Craft Stash, so I'll leave you a link below the video for it. I firmly pressed my VersaMark ink pad a couple of times through the stencil, keeping the stencil very firmly in place. Now if you're worried that you'll nudge the stencil, then just use washi tape to keep it in place. So for a bit of fun, I'm going to use 3 embossing powders for this project. I've got a clear embossing powder, a dark blue iridescent colour, and a gold. I mean, why use one when you can use 3? I've started with the clear as I want this to be my main colour. So the trick is with this to add the embossing powder separately, but you don't want to completely cover the ink with the first powder. And I put it in patches over where I think the ink is, because I can't actually see it on this page. You also don't want to use too much so that you don't cover the areas when you pour off the excess. Once you get to your final colour, then you can completely cover the whole area with that colour. And this will make sure that you haven't missed any bits. And I've been tapping out my excess onto spare pieces of paper, and I'm going to keep that paper out because I want to repeat this whole process for the opposite page. So I'm just heat setting my embossing powder as usual. Now you've got to be a little bit careful when doing this because you've got a layer of gesso there, you've also got some matte medium as well, and you don't want that layer to bubble and overheat. So it may look as if the heat tool is quite close to the paper, it's just the camera angle. I try and keep the heat tool away from the paper and heat gently. I'm also moving the heat tool around a bit more than perhaps I would if I was just using ordinary paper. And it's always a good idea if you're using a heat tool to do it in a well ventilated area. So I'm going to do exactly the same again, but this time on the opposite page and using the powder that I'd captured on the spare pieces of paper. Now once I've finished with that powder, I'm just going to put it straight back into the jars, which might horrify some of you. Yeah, there will be a little bit of contamination from the colours, but not enough for me to worry about. The only one that I'm going to keep completely clear is the clear, and I will put that in a separate jar. So it's always handy to have empty jars, so always keep your jars when you've finished your embossing powders. And you can mix your own embossing powders and use those jars, it's great. So all shiny and embossed. I'm just going to tear off those excess pieces of paper, and now I just need some focal points. For my focal points, I thought I would stick with my magazine theme and use the pretty Dragonfly Dreams die and stamp set that came with Simply Cards and Papercraft issue 171. Again, you'll find a link to it below in the description. Oh, wait a minute, is that one of my articles in there? Shameless plug, shameless plug, shameless plug. Okay, so it is for Christmas, but hey, plenty of time for next Christmas. Now for my focal points, I thought I would take some inspiration from Sue Hughes' article in this magazine. I think this double layering on vellum is quite fun, so I'm going to do something very similar. And if you want to go and say hi to Sue, I've left a link to her Facebook page below in the description. I'm cutting 2 Dragonfly bases from some paper I had left over from a monoprinting session on a gel plate. Don't forget to check out my jelly print video if you haven't seen it yet, and here's a link, and I've got another link in the description below. For this print I actually used a gel press plate, and I've also been trying out the Amsterdam Standard acrylic paints, and I'm pretty besotted with these 2 colours at the moment. Give me a shout if you've been trying out the Amsterdam Standard acrylic paints or their expert range. I would love to hear what you think about them, so do let me know. And then I'm just using the dies again, but this time on vellum. So I'm keeping both my positive and my negative die cut shapes, and I'm going to use my MISTI positioning tool to help me line up and stamp the Dragonfly. I'm going to use the VersaMark ink again to stamp with, and then I'll use the dark colour embossing powder to emboss the image. Don't forget to use your anti-static powder on the vellum before you stamp. I'm just nudging the stamp into position, then once it's in position I'll ink it up and stamp it out. And then you can repeat this process for as many dragonflies as you need. All you need to do is make sure that you put your negative template back in exactly the same place. So if you need to, use your magnets or tape it down with some washi tape. I generally use that lining up with my left hand corners as my go-to technique for pretty much most things. But you'll see sometimes in some of my videos I do occasionally stick the pieces down to make sure they don't move. Whatever works for you. Then it's just a case of carefully melting the embossing powder with the heat tool. Now I'm making 2 of these dragonflies, so I'll place my negative back into position and add the positive, and off we go again. Now I just want to stick my 2 layers of dragonflies together, and vellum is not a great fan of wet glue. So if you are using wet glue like I am here, just use a very small amount and try and put it somewhere that will hide it. So handily I've got this nice dark embossed area just under the body, and I'm going to just put it there. To add a little bit of dimension, I'm just going to shape my dragonfly wings. Now I've waited until the glue is completely dry so nothing will shift out of place. And all I'm doing is curling the wings around a pencil, or you could use a pen, anything that's round. And it doesn't really take that much persuasion to curl that paper round. Obviously you don't need to do this at all, I just like doing it because it adds that much more dimension, and it's in a book anyway, so once I shut those pages they'll be flattened out, but I don't know, it's one of those finishing touches that I quite like doing from time to time. So once the dragonflies are finished, it's just a case of sticking them down to the page and, well, deciding where you're going to put them as well. You know what, I don't know if I've gone and done it again. I've done 2 pages that just work well together rather than a double page spread. I know, right? I keep doing that, don't I? Now for some more inspiration, I think you could happily put some words on this page and it would look really good, but I think I'm going to leave it pretty much as it is. Mainly because I can never really think of the appropriate words to use. So tell you what, why don't you suggest what words you would like to see on these pages? And feel free to treat it as a single page spread or 2 separate pages when you're thinking about what words you would like to see on it. I can't wait to hear what you suggest. And if you've enjoyed the video, please do like it and share it with your friends. I would be massively grateful, that would be great, so thank you. I've got as close as my camera can focus so that you can really see that lovely gesso texture from the page pressing and the gorgeous shiny embossing with those 3 colours. I'll be back on Sunday with a new art and craft video. In the meantime, feel free to catch up with any of my videos that you might have missed, and here's a suggestion. So have fun creating, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.